Okay, so Parshas Mishpatim here in Neravram. We find Ve'ela HaMishpatim, right? Rashi brings down that Vav is adding on, wherever you're comfortable. Adding on, meaning Ma elu misinai, af elu misinai. The Aseres HaDibros were from Sinai. So too, these laws in Mishpatim are from Sinai. I think I mentioned the Rambam who said that if a person says that the words in the Torah, Achos Lotan Timna, right? One of these family genealogies is any less holy than Anochi Hashem Elokecha, so he's denying the validity of Torah, right? He's a kofar b'Torah, because every word, every letter in the Torah has this meaning. So the Torah here is telling us that the laws of damages, the laws that we find in the in this parsha, also came from Sinai. Now, why would we need an extra, so to speak, support for that? Why would we need to see? So the question is to learn to look at these laws the way we look at other laws. People, when you shift to Parshas Mishpatim, people think, okay, so this is the Jewish justice code, right? In other words, you can look up in ancient civilizations, right? They had courts of different kinds. Sometimes it was the king who decided. Sometimes they had judges. There were certain codes that were written up of laws and punishments and things like this. And this happens to be the Jewish one. That's not what we have here. This is coming from above. Okay, and we're going to try to see what that means in terms of it. So Rav Isaac Sher starts like this. He brings a psikta, okay, the Medrash the psikta, that brings a fascinating comparison. It says there are shishim mitzvahs b'nezikin. There are 60 like subcategories of mitzvahs in the laws of damages, just like you have in psachim. In the laws of Pesach, you can divide up into 60 subcategories. Why make that comparison? It seems like a strange comparison. He says it couldn't seem to be more different. Pesach is a yontif which is imbued with so much meaning, every detail of it. Whether the Korban Pesach, expressing the idea that we once again draw close to Hashem, we get our freedom, the matzah, which brings us back to the Yitzir from Mitzrayim, the chipazon, the speed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take us out, the chipazon of Am Yisrael to run out from Mitzrayim. And here we're talking about, an ox hits a donkey, and, this one falls in here, and this person was supposed to be watching over my donkey, and it got damaged, and what's happening? It seems, with all due respect, to be a different world. Aside from the fact, he says that it gets into unpleasantness. We're talking about arguments, what he calls in Hebrew, rivu madon umatzah muriva. Arguments, strife, fighting. That's what's happening in these types of things. Most of them involve a conflict, right, between two people. So he says we have to understand that this is exactly the mistake that Chazal wanted to fix up for us. Because if we take a look, the laws of Nezikin, the laws of damages, and the monetary laws, these interpersonal laws, are listed as mitzvahs, meaning they're not just a default, if this happens, this is how you kind of solve it. The Rambam lists the four shomrim, the four guards, so to speak, right? I can have my property watched over by a shomer chinam, somebody who's doing it for free. A shomer socher, somebody I pay for, right? A shoel, someone who's borrowing. Shoel and the socher, right? The one who rents. So these are all different categories. The Rambam lists each as a mitzvah aseh, as a mitzvah that you do when you do this in the right way. So to the arba avos nezikin, right, the four categories of damages, right, like the fire and the teeth, the eating and the regel, all these different things, a boar falling into a pit, also listed as four mitzvahs aseh. So that means if they're listed as a mitzvahs aseh, dealing with these cases in the way the Torah tells you, they're listed in the same level as the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach. And in the same way, just like you're supposed to do that mitzvah with simcha and with kavana, so too, if you have such a court case that you're coming to Beis Din, you're supposed to get ready for it with anticipation. Hini muchan mazuman. I'm about to do this mitzvah of coming to the court, and the Beis Din is going to decide this idea of the damages. Okay, he says, let's take an example. The famous Mishnah in Bava Metzia, where it says, Shnai mochazim betalis. Two people are holding on to this talis, right? They found it in the street. Zeh omer ani mitzvasiya v'kula sheli. One says, I found it and it's all mine. Zeh omer ani mitzvasiya v'kula sheli. The other one says, I found it and it's all mine. So then they have to take a shvuah. Each one swears. Now a shvuah is not just, the oath in the courtroom nowadays, you tell the truth, the whole truth, which is scary enough. But here a shvuah is something based in really, there's something called the iyum, the intimidation, so to speak, by explaining before you take a shvuah, realize what it means if you're taking a false shvuah. But if you're not, if you're supposed to do it, he said, this is a tremendous mitzvah. It's called the mitzvah, it says, the pasuk says, Hashem Elokecha tira ubishmo tishavea. Fear Hashem your God and swear in His name. Meaning, when it comes to that point where to get things clear in Beis Din, you have to make a shvuah, and there are different times, right? Modeh b'miktsas is one of the cases. Somebody says, you owe me $500. I say, no, I only owe you $250. So I need to swear. There's the shvuah of the modeh b'miktsas. And this is done in a very solemn ceremony. But if you're doing it because you have to do it, he said, this is a wonderful mitzvah. This is a very holy thing. And he says, now, who did Chazal make this for? It isn't made for cheaters. Okay? It's really made for a person who has fear of Hashem. Right? It's there that the person who is actually going to make the shvuah, it may push aside some people who are trying to cheat or fake, and they'll back off. But when a person comes to do it, that's a mitzvah in the Torah. That a person comes and swears, and it's supposed to be a person of Yiras Shamayim. As Hashem Elokecha tira v'oso tavod. Okay, so he says, this is an Avodas Kodesh. This is an act of Avodah, something that a person should prepare himself for and do b'kavana. And we see here, look at what's been happening. They found the Metzia, they found the lost object. We don't view that as random. We view that as something HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave people as a gift. The fact that that object was there without any signs, and these people encountered it, right? It's a gift. In fact, it says you make a bracha on finding an object. If it's valuable enough, you say, Baruch Hatov Ha'metiv, right? Or Shechayanu, on finding this object. Now here, it got complicated, because the two people each really believe that they found it first. Okay? So the whole complicated sugya there in the beginning. So therefore, they come to do the shvuah. And by making this shvuah, it brings them close to Hashem. This is a spiritual avoda, the making of the shvuah. This isn't technical courtroom stuff that we're doing in order to deal with problems that come up. This is part of the Torah which is there. In other words, let's take a step aside for a second from Rav Isaac Sher to a piece from the Priya Aretz, from Menachem Mendel Vitebsk. He was one of the first Hasidic Rebbes who came to Eretz Yisrael. And he says, why is the Torah writing these dinim? In other words, it seems that the Torah just wants things to be in order. In other words, that's part of an orderly society, that you have some kind of code of laws how to deal with conflicts. So why doesn't the Torah just say, judge people fairly, right? Treat people fairly, something like that. In fact, in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, in the 7 Noahide laws, they're also supposed to do mishpat. It's very general. Dinim. Right, dinim. You're supposed to have some kind of court system. Why does the Torah have to get into such incredible detail, right, into everything we're doing? So he explains that we're looking at things backwards. In order to understand its backwardsness, let's go to the Haggadah of Pesach. Right, the Beis HaLevi, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik explained like this. The Rosh's question, right, Ma avoda azos lachem, and lachem v'chododo, etc. So you tell him, right, Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisim mitzrayim. Because of this, Hashem did for me when He took me out of Mitzrayim. He explains like this. The Rosh says, okay, with all due respect, we got out of Mitzrayim like a couple thousand years ago. We still got to drive ourselves crazy, cleaning the house, eating matzah, getting tummy aches. Like, come on, right? You want to commemorate, we can do something else. He says, no, you have it wrong. You think because we came out of Mitzrayim, so we have these mitzvahs. those mitzvahs are part of the eternal Torah that existed before the world. Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li, Hashem had history play out so that those mitzvahs would come into the world in that way in that time. Okay, it's a very different view of how it's going. So too, he says, the idea of these laws of damages wasn't just HaKadosh Baruch Hu looking, people live together, there's going to be accidents, cows and donkeys and, lost goods and all these kind of things. Better write them some kind of code of jurisprudence. No, each thing there is something of great Kedusha that is part of the Torah. It's meant to come into the world, and it fits into these kelim, so to speak, into these vessels. Right? Again, if you're getting into the world of the mystical, like he quoted the Rama Mipano, right, the great Mekubal from Italy, who said that the four Shomrim, I think, are connected, the four letters of Shem Havaya, right, of Hashem's name, and he explains their what and how, right? That none of these things are as simple as they seem or straight out. So therefore, he says, yeah, please. Thank you. Yeah, it's winter, right? So he says, therefore, he says, let's take a look at an aspect of it, at this idea of the shvuah, when sometimes either the shomer chinam, the one who watches for free, or the shomer sachar, the one who is paid to watch something, has to make a shvuah. The Torah uses two different psukim to describe this in our parsha. When it's the shomer chinam, it says, "V'nikrav bal habayis el ha'elokim." It introduces his shvuah by saying that this Bal Habayis, this man who was watching over this object for free, and note that the Torah calls him a Bal Habayis, he must get close to Hashem and then make a shvuah. When it comes to the Shomer Sachar, someone who is paid, it just says, Shvuas Hashem tiyeh ben shneim. If there's going to be a conflict, there has to be a shvuah, which will be made. Now he says, it seems strange. Says you have to. So here he's saying Elokim being HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? I know some say, right, even saying it without the Elokim, that he's getting close to it. But here he explains it like this. So he says, the Torah calls the Shomer Chinam a Bal Habayis. He says usually the scenario of Shomer Chinam would be, I'm a person who, for whatever reason, either I'm poor, I'm homeless, I'm traveling, I don't have a safe place to keep my stuff. Here I find a Bal Habayis, and this is a man who has a house, he has a safe, he has something that can protect and lock up, and he, as a favor to this poor person, is going to watch over his things. Huh? Why poor? Because in general, he says, a person could look over their own things. Right? He says the fact that he calls the shomer a Bal Habayis, right? He says that again, he's dramatizing it. It doesn't have to be halachically. It could be one homeless man watching over for the other homeless man. But he says in terms of this, and he says, therefore, this might be a citizen that we think, right, is on a higher level, even spiritually. The shomer sachar, when you look in the Gemara, the idea of someone who's paid to watch things, that's viewed as the lowest minimum wage kind of job, right? In terms of when we're deciding after injury, is a person able to work, or if we're looking to pay him back for his downtime, it's the idea of they used to have watchmen in the fields. You sit there, right, and you watch the cucumbers grow, right? This is not the most exciting career track, and the pay was commensurate. Okay, so, but he says most common type of shomer sachar that you had in the old days was a shepherd, okay? The shepherd was out there. He was paid to watch your sheep. Many great men started off that way, right? We had Yaakov Avinu, David HaMelech, all these.
We had a watchman from Mashiach coming.
Oh, that's a good one. That's at least an optimistic job.
He'd say, the pay's not so good, but I have job security.
Oh, at least till Mashiach comes. Right? So now the Shomer Sachar, Chazal actually say that shepherds oftentimes were thieves. Okay, right? They were both the thieves, and they're also represented in Chazal as ignorant. Thieves, because it's just so easy when you're out there taking your flock to eat someone else's stuff. You pass by somebody's field, the sheep start munching away, you're kind of happy, and eventually you move them on, but meanwhile, they've eaten some of that person's food. The ignorance, right? The Gemara, right? You bumped into it not long ago. A person says, "Nemoni malai shlosha roi bakar." Someone says, I'm happy with a Beis Din of 3 cowboys, right? Three people who watch over a flock of cows, and that's a sign of people who don't know much. So he says, you would think that those people need much more preparation to make the shua. He says the Torah doesn't want us to make such a mistake and to generalize. He says we shouldn't look. He says it could be that this shepherd is a tremendous tzaddik like Yaakov Avinu, right? And therefore he is prepared to make the shua without this vinikrav, without this preparation. And it could be that this person who's, this fine upstanding citizen with a nice house needs a lot of work in order to be able to make the shua properly. Okay, so he says, therefore, you have to view it almost like as people coming to do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. When you're coming to court and you're going to be making a shua, this is a spiritual act that requires a person to be imbued with Yiras Shamayim as much as he can, right? And to do this mitzvah with all the intention that we do other mitzvahs. We do it to benefit all of Am Yisrael, right? B'Shem Kol Yisrael, that we want this mitzvah to bring benefit, right? To bring back captives, to protect the soldiers, to do all these things. So too, if you're going into court, having this argument with your neighbor, when you participate in that process, that's what it's supposed to be. Okay, so he says, this is why Chazal said the following. Ela Mishpatim asher tosim lifneim, our first pasuk, these are the laws you should put before them. It says, lifneihem, v'lo lifnei elkot shel akum. Before the Batei Din of Am Yisrael, but not before the courts of non-Jews. Okay, now people say, wait a second, I know a gazillion people who've gone to court, fine, upstanding religious people, etc. But, again, if it's 2 Jewish people, etc., you need to get permission before going to non-Jewish court. Okay, the default is to go to Beis Din. And he says, and it's not only if the non-Jewish court system has different laws than we do, right? They said, even if the court, in this case, their judgment, they were going by the exact same rules as the Jewish people would be, you're not allowed to go there. Now he says, this looks like a halacha that has no reasoning behind it. In other words, it's the exact same laws. But he says, no. Here, right away in the beginning of Eila Mishpatim, it's teaching us that you're not dealing here with just a clever judge who can look up, precedents and codes of law and decide what this is going to be. He says, this is a spiritual experience. The 2 litigants are coming to find out what Hashem wants to happen in this case. Okay? And, right, sometimes they have to take a shvuah. And when they leave the court, both of them are supposed to be delighted. The Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Zayin says, "Do'azumi beidina shakal glima." If a person comes out of the Beis Din, and Beis Din had told him, you got to give back that coat, you got to give it to this person, right? It's not yours. Nizamer zemer v'lizo ba'orcha. You should sing a song as you go. Zippity doodah. Right? Because the pasuk says, like Yisro said to Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'gam kola amazel makom yovo l'shalom." If you set up these batei din, everybody is going to be in their place with peace, meaning things are the way they're supposed to be. Right? Now, sometimes it's very hard to understand. Again, Beis Din can make mistakes, and there can be appeals, and there can be different things like that. But there are cases, and here the Ramban speaks about this, and the Zohar Kodesh speaks about it even more, that sometimes something happens in Beis Din, and you feel that this is not the right decision. A friend of mine told me his father was not a wealthy fellow. He worked in the post office here in Israel. He had his pension, he had his savings, and then some court case came up with his apartment, and he said it was clear to him that the other person was lying, bold-faced, to Beis Din. They just weren't able to prove it. And since they couldn't prove that he was lying, Beis Din had to go with what they had before them, and they lost the case. And he said, his father said, we must look at this, that this is Min HaShamayim, this is the way it was meant to be. Okay? In other words, now again, the Zohar Kodesh gets into all sorts of things of Gilgulim, right? Meaning, you don't realize that these things can be changing hands to account for things that happened hundreds of years ago and things. It's not a field I know and understand about, but the very fact is you have to look at a much bigger picture that's happening. This is not meant to excuse sloppy dayanim, right? A dayan is supposed to be totally focused and on doing what's right and finding what's right, okay? But when a person sees that, sometimes that can be. So he says, therefore, and this is a good punchline to have, how does a Jew really go to Beis Din? When it comes up, he says, this is the way it's supposed to be. Usually there's an argument. Usually each person feels that he's right. And he wants Beis Din to affirm that and to then put it into action. That's why I'm going, right? Now, he says, this is not really going to Beis Din as the Torah wanted. You're going to Beis Din to try and get something out of them. Says that is almost the same as going to non-Jewish courts, meaning you've turned the Jewish court into a non-Jewish court. By you turning it into a battlefield where I'm going to come and I'm going to have my guy and we're going to tell the Dayanim, I'm sure I'm going to get this out of him, that shouldn't be your goal. He says that's the way people approach other courts. He says you should come, both people, to come across and saying we're about to do something very holy now. The Torah set up this idea of Dayanim. The Torah set up an idea of witnesses. The Torah set up ideas of contracts, and there are things of damages. And really, when you look into monetary cases, it's fun to look into monetary cases in halacha. Sometimes there's this one Rav who said, there's a very good thing you can do. If you're at a Shabbos table with people that aren't very observant, right, you start telling them divrei Torah, they're going to throw their, whatever, lettuce at you or something like that. You're boring them with this thing. But if you put out a question, what do you say about this? Right? My neighbor decided he's going to extend his porch, and it's shading, I think. Do you think he has the right to do that? Does he have to pay me? Everybody likes to pitch in. Everybody has thoughts on the matter, right? But then you have to see what the Torah says. Okay, so it's true. You're approaching with what you think, but what both people really want is to have this process, and it's called, Chazal say, when justice is done properly in the Beis Din, it brings the Shekhinah into the world. That means into my day-to-day life, of my property, right, of my damages, of my lost objects, of all these kind of things, this becomes something of Kedusha, right? I'm not just slogging it out anymore with two people like anyone else going to court. We're both coming to try to hear what does Hashem want. And we're both supposed to walk out of this happily when we hear. If this really wasn't mine, in the eyes of the Torah, I am so happy it didn't stay with me. I don't want something that's not mine. Right? That's something that's supposed to be part and parcel of who we are. So therefore, it's Magid Dvarav LeYaakov Chukav Mishpativ LeYisrael. This is a unique experience for Am Yisrael. This is not just Am Yisrael's version of courts. And a person say, listen, I never wanted to go to law school. I'm not very interested in courts. I'm not very interested in this. Don't look at this as courts. Don't look at this as a law curriculum. This is Kedusha. And as you said, there are lessons to be learned from life for all the different aspects here and all the different things, even if you never yourself bump into such a case. Okay, that's what we come and learn. This is what it tells us. Yeah, please.
So if you go to Beis Din, even if you feel you're the aggrieved party, your goal should be emes and Kedusha.
Yeah.
Not to win money.
Right, right. Then he says you're treating it like a non-Jewish court.
It's pretty high Madrega for most people.
Yeah, it's something that you really have to think, but a person should really prepare themselves for it, right? Because that should be, and again, that should be the way people resolve things. I once rented an apartment, and it was written into the rental contract. The landlord said, you pick a Rav, who we'll go to, right, for decisions. If we have an argument among us, I'll let you pick, but we'll write it into the contract that conflicts will be decided by so-and-so. Right, that's a very good thing to have, right? Is so that people can know that they're doing right and what it's there. So anyway, that's going to accompany us through this parsha and other places in the Torah and large sections of the Gemara and all sorts of places like that. And to realize that this is Kedusha that brings Kedusha into the world. That helps. They say when Din Emes is done in Am Yisrael, it brings the Shekhinah into Am Yisrael, and it's something we should aspire to. If everyone wants it, that'll help the Batei Din, right, do better.